This episode may contain content of a graphic nature, including descriptions of physical and sexual violence against adults, children, and animals. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi everyone, I'm Tanya.
And I'm Talia.
And we are TNT Crimes and Consequences, a true crime podcast. Hi, Talia.
Hey, Tanya. Hi, listeners. How is everybody today?
Well, me personally, I'm doing great.
Good.
I don't know about the listeners, but I hope y'all are doing wonderful too.
You got a little southern accent
I
thrown
did.
in there. We're not from the South, but that's okay. I want to ask everybody who's listening to us to take 1 second to hit the follow/subscribe button wherever you're listening, because it really does help us, and we really do appreciate it. And I'm excited to hear what you got for me today.
Well, then I'm just going to dig in. On June 2nd, 1991, a woman named Denise Huber was planning to attend a concert with her friend Rob. Rob and Denise were going to a Morrisey concert, and Denise arrived at Rob's house to pick him up. She was wearing a short black dress that had spaghetti straps, a matching black jacket, black thigh-high stockings, and black 9 West high-heel shoes. She also wore silver hoop earrings, a birthstone ring on her right ring finger, and on her left pinky finger, she wore a silver ring that was in the shape of a dolphin. The other jewelry she had was a gold chain around her neck with a heart-shaped pendant with a diamond set in it. Before going to the concert, she and Rob stopped at a liquor store, and they bought orange juice and a small bottle of vodka. They arrived to the concert venue a half an hour before the concert started. So they sat in the car together, drinking screwdrivers and talking about how excited they were to see the concert. Once the concert was over, Denise and Rob decided they were going to stop at a restaurant in Long Beach, California, which was about 45 minutes from where the concert took place, and it was only a few miles away from Rob's house. They invited other friends to join them for food and drinks, and at about 1:30, the restaurant announced last call. Rob and Denise decided they should probably get going because Denise had to work the next day. Denise dropped Rob off at his house at about 2 a.m., and she told him she was going straight home, which was about a half an hour to 40 minutes from Rob's house. Denise was never seen alive again. Denise was 23 years old, and she lived at home with her parents, Dennis and Ione. The morning after the concert was a Monday. When her parents woke up that morning, they said they both had an uneasy feeling. And since Denise was an adult, they normally didn't check up on her, but she did give them the heads up of where she was going, and if she was going to stay out all night and spend the night at a friend's house, she would let them know. For some reason this Monday morning, Dennis decided to go check on her and went to her bedroom. He found her bed was made, and thought that was really strange because he thought if Denise had come home from the concert that night before and then got up to go somewhere, she probably wouldn't have made her bed. Her parents knew that she had to work that day and thought, well, maybe she went to her friend Tammy's house to spend the night. They tried not to panic and called Tammy. No, Denise hadn't spent the night, and Tammy said she didn't see her that night before. They then called Rob because they knew he was going to the concert with Denise. And they found out that Denise had dropped him off at his house at about 2 a.m. and told him she was going straight home. Her parents also called their son Jeff, Denise's brother, who lived nearby. He hadn't seen her. They called her job. They said, no, we haven't seen her either. They also called nearby hospitals to see maybe did they get any Jane Does, and no, they did not get any Jane Does.
So it sounds like they're panicking now. I mean, if you're calling a hospital.
Yes, they're panicking, although they're trying not to panic. When her friend Tammy received that call from Dennis and Ione, she thought there had to be a reasonable explanation, but she was really overcome with fear and anxiety. She was worrying about Denise, so she called her boyfriend. And he said, well, come on over to my office and, we'll spend a little time together. So she did. But this was just bugging her, the thought, where could Denise go? Because she was calling her answering machine to see if Denise maybe left a message and she hadn't. After she left her boyfriend's office, she was going to try and retrace Denise's route from Rob's house to Denise's house to see if she could find anything along the way. She figured that Denise would take the freeway, since it was the quickest route, and not take the Pacific Coast Highway because the girls had discussed it in the past that there were just way too many police along the Pacific Coast Highway. Tammy got on the freeway and, unsure of exactly what she was looking for, she's driving along and she's scanning both sides of the freeway. And lo and behold, on the side of the freeway was Denise's silver blue Honda. Tammy's stomach did a flip-flop. She couldn't get over in time to pull up behind the Honda, so she got off at the next exit and found a liquor store that had a payphone. She called Denise's parents and told them of her discovery, and she gave them directions to where they could find the car.
It was just on the side of the highway?
Along the shoulder. After hanging up, Tammy got back on the freeway and looped around so that she could park behind Denise's car to look around. She got out of her car, looked inside Denise's, but she didn't touch anything. She said the car looked like it always did, except Denise's stockings were on the passenger seat. Tammy decided to leave, which happened to be immediately before Dennis and Ione arrived. Her parents noticed that her car keys were missing. They weren't in the ignition. And they saw the stockings on the seat, but other than that, they didn't see anything unusual. They returned home and called the Newport Beach Police Department to file a missing persons report, and they also gave the police department the permission to take custody of Denise's car. Police went to investigate the scene, and they found one of Denise's rear tires was completely shredded, which they believe was the reason why she pulled over that night on her way home. They also found black marks on the pavement near the tire, and it led to the shoulder of the road, so they're thinking the tire blew and she kind of had to get over really
Lost
quick.
Control, probably. Was losing control,
Yes.
probably.
They called police dogs to see if they could pick up a scent, but they didn't really lead anywhere helpful. And officers did search the nearby area to find anything that could be a clue, and they didn't find anything.
No footprints or anything?
No. Sergeant Ronald Smith from the police department arrived to the scene before the car was towed, and he looked inside the car. He had the stockings bagged for evidence, and he also collected a beach towel and a backpack from the car. When he looked at the shredded tire, he thought it was really unusual because shredding usually happens when a tire is low on air. And he thought maybe there was some sabotage, or maybe the valve stem to the tire was tampered with. Sergeant Smith then wondered, when this happened to Denise, what would she have done? And he thought, well, she probably went to go find a telephone. He said there was an emergency call box within a short distance from where the car had been left. Maybe if she hadn't seen that one, there were alternate routes that she could have taken where payphones were available. For example, there was a payphone about 0.2 of a mile away from the car. And if she had continued just walking along the highway, she would have encountered another emergency phone box. Since none of these things happened because there was never a phone call made by Denise, he thought one of two things had to have happened. First, she was offered a ride by someone and accepted it and got into someone's car willingly, or she had been forced into another car. Police were fortunate in that there was someone who could provide them with a little bit of not quite eyewitness testimony, but gave them a really big clue. A woman named Cynthia Brown had a job delivering newspapers for the Orange County Register in Costa Mesa, California, which took her out in the early morning hours to deliver papers. Cynthia told the police she always left her house about 2:14 a.m., and I thought that was kind of funny that it was so precise.
Not 2:15.
Not 2:15, 2:14, and that she would get to the warehouse by 2:30. She would pass the freeway where Denise's car was found. That was along her route. And she told him that in the early morning of Denise's disappearance, she passed a car with its hazard lights blinking, and it was along the shoulder of the freeway. She said it was a blue Honda, and she estimated that the time had to be about 2:25 a.m. She told the police she did not see anyone walking along the freeway, nor did she see anyone in distress near or by the car. The week following Denise's disappearance, the television show America's Most Wanted profiled the case. They were hoping that by getting the word out about Denise's disappearance, someone would remember something. Over 24 tips were called in, but none of them panned out. Right before the 4th of July holidays, so this is maybe a month later, there was a group that sponsored a large banner that was about 30 feet long by 6 feet high. It had a portrait of Denise on it, and it said, "Have you seen Denise Huber?" They said where her car was found, and they listed a telephone number for the police. And this was put right in the area where her car had been found. And this banner would be seen by millions of people every day. So it's another thing that they're trying to do to produce tips. In 1991, Inside Edition did an interview with Dennis and Ione to interview them about Denise's disappearance. And this program was aired nationwide. I don't know if you remember Inside Edition.
Of course I do.
I do too. And the show generated tips again. But despite all of this publicity and all of these tips that came in, Denise's case grows cold.
It's just shocking because that's a lot of press for a missing person.
It is a lot of press because in 1993, Hard Copy did a story about Denise's disappearance. And again, more tips came in.
I loved Hard Copy.
I loved Hard Copy too.
I love all those shows you're talking about.
I know we didn't miss them at my house. All this publicity is happening, but no useful tips are coming in. And her parents are distraught. I mean, obviously, right? So by the spring of 1994, her parents decided they wanted to leave California because it just became too painful for them. Everything reminded them of Denise.
They need a fresh start.
They needed a fresh start. So they took a trip to North Dakota, which is where Dennis grew up. And they found a house for sale, and they decided to make the move. So we're going to fast forward to May of 1994. So this is almost 3 years after Denise's disappearance. There's a couple named Elaine and Jack, and they're at a swap meet in Prescott Valley, Arizona. They were not only a couple, but they also had a paint business together. At the swap meet, they meet a guy who's a painting contractor, and he told them he had a bunch of paint at his house and he was willing to sell it to them. He told them that he had recently moved to Arizona from California for a fresh start, and the three of them decide Jack and Elaine would follow him to his home and go through his supplies.
He's selling his paint supplies?
Mm-hmm. He had a lot. He had cans of paint literally everywhere. In his house, in his yard, everywhere. So he's got a lot to sell. When Jack and Elaine pull into this guy's driveway, they see a big yellow truck with the Ryder logo on it, like that you rent to move.
A moving truck, right?
Yes, a moving truck. And they noticed that the truck had to have been there a while because grass was growing around the tires. Elaine thought this is really weird because she wondered why someone would keep a Ryder truck in the driveway for so long. When they finished their business transaction, Elaine was still really bothered by the truck, and she noticed that it had Massachusetts license plates. Jack said to her, "Oh, it was probably stolen." So Elaine grabbed...
Ha ha ha.
Yeah, ha ha ha.
But, you know, oftentimes when I see those moving trucks, they have license plates from
other states.
Yeah, but maybe that wasn't a thing back in 1994.
So Elaine grabbed a piece of paper. She wrote down the license plate number along with the VIN number of the truck. I don't know how she got so close, but this must have been before they got in the car to leave.
She was very bothered by this.
She was. Jack and Elaine had been victims of theft recently, and so I think that's why she was so bothered by it.
It was in her mind.
Yes. They had a friend that was in the Phoenix Police Department who they told about the Ryder truck. And so he called the Ryder company, and they told him, no one's reported a stolen truck. So the guy at the police department says, "Well, can you please check again?" And they agreed to do that. So he said he was going to wait for them to call him back. After about an hour, which I thought was really fast, someone from the security department at Ryder called the police department back and said the truck had been missing for 6 months, and it was from Orange County, California. They said due to some oversight, the truck had never been reported stolen. So the next morning, they reported it stolen with the Orange County Sheriff's Department in California. On July 13th of 1994, so this is just a short time after this call was made, Deputy D. Giacomo from the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office.
Good job.
Thank you.
I don't know if it's right, but it sounded good.
I don't know if it's right either. He followed up on the tip to check out the truck. He got to the house and he confirmed the VIN numbers of the truck in the driveway and the stolen truck were the same. He also noticed there was a very thick electrical extension cord coming out of the back of the truck, like underneath the doors, and it looped over a fence going to the neighbor's house.
So the door was closed on it?
Yes.
And it went to the neighbor's yard?
And it went to the neighbor's yard.
Is that what you said?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
The deputy was really suspicious that the truck was maybe possibly being used as a drug lab. And
oh, yeah.
So he knocked on the door of the house, but no one answered. So he called the Prescott area narcotics team. They arrived at 1:15 p.m. and they didn't find any traces of chemicals that were used in drug labs. So I'm thinking maybe they did the outside of the truck, took samples, or maybe in the air or something.
Like they do at the airport, swab, like your suitcase?
Right. Maybe. The extension cord that was coming out of the back of the truck really made them wonder if maybe there was illegal supplies being stored in the truck. They couldn't get into the truck, though, because there was a lock on it. So they had to wait for a search warrant, which they did get. And I'm thinking it came pretty quick, because this all happened in the same day.
That is really quick for a search warrant.
I know. The deputy called the locksmith, and the locksmith arrived to unlock the truck. When they opened the door initially, they first found a bunch of paint cans that were stacked, but looking toward the back of the truck, the officer saw a large rectangular appliance that looked a lot like a deep freezer. And that's what was plugged into the cord that ran out of the truck.
Oh, no.
He's
freezing paint again.
He's freezing paint. It was obvious to the officers that whoever lived in the home was trying to keep something frozen and hidden away in this Ryder truck. One of the members of the narcotics team put on a mask and gloves, and he opened up the freezer. As soon as he opened the freezer, an awful smell hit him in the face, and he had to control his gag reflex because he said it smelled an awful lot like rotting flesh. So before I tell you what is actually in the freezer, it's time for a shameless plug.
Hit it. Hey everyone, if you go to our website, tntcrimes.com, you can find full unreleased episodes available for individual purchase. You can also join our membership where you get unlimited access to all of our unreleased episodes and early releases, mini episodes, and so many other awesome things. So go to tntcrimes.com. And thanks again for all your support.
So you want to know what's in the freezer?
Yes, I do.
Of course you do.
Of course I do.
When the detective looked inside the freezer, he saw there was a large object covered in black plastic garbage bags. He reached inside and ran his hand along the bags, and he recoiled in horror. He said that whatever he touched, it sure felt a lot like a frozen human arm.
Oh, man. Don't get paid enough to do that.
And he's on the narcotics team, so they're like, we need to call homicide.
Yeah. I'm tapping out.
Officers from the homicide department show up, and they're going to video record the opening of the freezer. One of the homicide detectives used a knife to cut through the top layers of the black garbage bags, being really careful. They cut through 3 layers before they found what looked like a nude shoulder and an arm.
So it was 3 separate garbage bags?
Mm-hmm. As they looked deeper into the freezer and through the garbage bags, they saw a pair of hands that were handcuffed behind the back of the body. So they saw the silver handcuffs. And they noticed that the body was in sort of a fetal position with the back toward the front of the freezer and the head toward the left corner of the freezer. The detectives wondered why the body was in this tight position because there was still room in the freezer. They noticed that the garbage bags at the bottom were frozen to the freezer bottom with blood or bodily fluids. And they noticed there were ice crystals. So they said this body had to have been in there a while.
Like freezer burn?
Yeah, sort of like that.
Oh, man.
As they're digging further and further uncovering more of the body, they couldn't tell yet whether it was a man or a woman. And they saw that the head was covered with white plastic garbage bags, so it was wrapped separately. They figured that the person wasn't killed there, like in that Ryder truck. They figured the person had to have been killed and then put in the freezer later, maybe a day or two after they were killed, because there was some decomposition that had happened. So it wasn't like the person was killed and then immediately put in the freezer. They kept trying to get someone, like a resident from the house, but there was no answer still. So they made the call to the medical examiner. The medical examiner decided that they were just going to transport the freezer as a whole to the coroner's office. And the detectives started canvassing the neighborhood. They found 2 neighbors that said they first saw the Ryder truck in the driveway about 2 months earlier, which would be sometime in January 1994, and that it had been in the same spot where it was about 2 months.
So he actually moved it around for a little bit?
I'm thinking that had to have been what happened. Like, it didn't stay in the stationary position it had been found in. There was a white pickup truck in the driveway also, in addition to the Ryder truck, so police call in the license plates, and they found it belonged to a man named John Joseph Familaro.
I don't like John.
You're not going to like John.
I already don't.
Police are still processing the scene, and about 5:30 that evening, John and his mother, they were in the same car, they stop in front of the house, and John was arrested for the felony theft of the Ryder truck. They found out that the extension cord that came out of the truck was plugged into John's mother's home, and she's the person that lived next door.
So he lives next door to his mom. That's his neighbor.
Yes.
And he was borrowing her electricity?
He was borrowing her electricity. His mother said she thought the Ryder truck had been there about 2 months, and that she thought that John was using it for his painting business.
Which he had his paint in it.
He did have his paint in it. She said that the neighbors had complained that there were just too many paint cans in his yard, and so she thought he was using it to move them somewhere. The police questioned her about the freezer, and she said she didn't know anything about the freezer. And then they said, well, why is there an extension cord being plugged into your house? And she said that John's electricity had been shut off earlier that month, and that while he was working to get it back on, she allowed him to string the extension cord to his house in order to keep his refrigerator running. The police got a search warrant for John's mother's house, but they really didn't find anything of interest. This happened on that same day, and John is being booked at the police station at this time. And once he was given his Miranda warning, he told them he was not going to speak to them anymore and that he wanted a lawyer. So they're not able to interview him. Police executed a search warrant on John's house, and they found several things that were quite interesting.
Oh, I bet.
They found a cardboard box that was marked Christmas, like on the outside. Inside of it was a smaller box, and in the smaller box, there was a nail bar. And a nail bar is a tool that's used to pull nails out of something.
It's got that claw at the end?
Yes, it's got a claw at the end.
And they found blood on it?
They found blood on it.
Oh.
They found an empty handcuff box, duct tape, and a cloth that looked like it had bloodstains. They found in another box handcuffs that were similar to the handcuffs that the victim was wearing, along with a handcuff key. They also found several documents, and they were described as identification documents, such as driver's licenses, birth certificates, credit cards, and things like that, with all different women's names on them.
Whoa.
They found another box that was marked Christmas again, with a bloodstained knapsack and a claw hammer that also seemed to be spotted with blood. They also found a blood-stained black plastic bags that had items with the name Denise Huber. In their search, they also found several guns, videotapes that featured the actress Suzanne Summers.
Oh,
like a lot of videos.
Hell?
And videos about Charles Manson and Jeffrey Dahmer.
Oh, that's not good.
No. Police initially were afraid they were dealing with a serial killer. So after finding the documents with Denise's name as well as the other women's names, the lieutenant on the case in Arizona, his name was Lieutenant Mosher, he decided he was going to look up the names in his computer database. He immediately got a hit for Denise, who he saw had been a missing person since 1991.
That was through Denise's ID?
Yes. And he noticed that the case was with the Costa Mesa, California Police Department. He did get hits on some of the other women, and they were all alive. Some of them didn't even know that their documents had been stolen. So I'm not sure where he got them from. I'm thinking during his painting business, he was going through people's belongings and just stealing stuff. So Lieutenant Mosher calls the Costa Mesa department, and he speaks with Sergeant Tom Boylan. And he told Sergeant Boylan about the items with Denise's name on them. And so Sergeant Boylan fills in Lieutenant Mosher about Denise's case. And that's when Lieutenant Mosher says, we've also found a body in a freezer, but it hasn't been positively identified yet. And they don't even know whether the victim is male or female at this point. He told Sergeant Boylan that an autopsy would be done once the body was thawed out. And tentatively, it was scheduled for July 16th, so 3 days later. Sergeant Boylan tells Lieutenant Mosher what Denise was wearing the night she disappeared. And they end the conversation after Lieutenant Mosher told Sergeant Boylan he would keep in touch when he knew more information. The 2 boxes marked Christmas were searched more thoroughly, and I'm going to tell you some more of the contents of these boxes. They found a California driver's license belonging to Denise, along with several credit cards in her name, a checkbook with her name as the account holder, a Hawaii keychain with keys belonging to a Honda, a black dress, a black blouse, black high-heeled shoes, and all of these items were stained with what appeared to be bloodstains. So those were the items that they found that they think belonged to Denise. They also found, in John's house, was a pair of blood-spattered jeans, men's jeans, and a blood-soaked white sweatshirt. They also found a videotape with that Inside Edition interview that her parents made, where they were pleading for information about Denise's case. So police thought this was really sick. After the search was done, Lieutenant Mosher was convinced that it had to be Denise in the freezer. So he calls Costa Mesa again, and he asks to talk to Sergeant Boylan because he had promised Sergeant Boylan that when he found more information, he would give him a call. And since these Christmas boxes were searched again, this is new information. When he made the call, he found out that there was a different police officer in charge of the case, and his name was Lieutenant Smith. Both lieutenants talked about the items that were found, and Lieutenant Mosher said, I have a really good feeling that it's probably Denise in the freezer. And Lieutenant Mosher invited Lieutenant Smith to attend the autopsy. And Lieutenant Smith made plans to fly to Phoenix. On his trip to Phoenix, Lieutenant Smith took 2 other detectives with him who had spent many, many long hours on Denise's case. One was a homicide detective named Linda Geisler, and she actually was the first woman in the United States to become a homicide detective.
Good for her.
So she's a badass. She had worked extensively on Denise's case. So she was told about the discovery in Arizona from Sergeant Boylan. She couldn't believe it, and she was really excited to go to Arizona to hopefully solve Denise's case. After hanging up with Sergeant Boylan, when he gives her this news, she called Lieutenant Smith, and he told her more about what was in the box and that they also found a silver ring that was in the shape of a dolphin. Detective Geisler knew it was Denise. She next called Denise's parents because she had promised them a long time ago if she ever found out more information, she would let them know.
Oh, that's got to be a hard phone call.
Oh, it had to be. Ione answered the phone, and Detective Geisler said, would it be okay if I came over? And she said, well, Dennis isn't home, but yes, you can come over. Detective Geisler decides that even though Dennis isn't home, she was still going to meet with Ione because she was afraid that they would find out through the press or some other means, and she wanted to be the one to give them this news. She went with Sergeant Boylan and another detective to the Huber home, and they noticed that the Hubers were packing for their upcoming move to North Dakota. As gently and tactfully as she could, Detective Geisler told Ione of the discovery in Arizona and that a positive identification had not been made yet. She said, "I'm really sorry that I had to tell you this before Dennis got home." And she said, "Is there anything you want me to do, or do you want me to stay with you?" Ione said, "No, you don't need to stay with me." And when the detectives left, she called Dennis. Dennis then called Detective Geisler to get all of the details, and he said, of course it's not the news that he was hoping for, but at least maybe their questions as to what happened to Denise could be answered.
That is heartbreaking.
I can't even imagine.
Don't want to.
And they then had to call their son, Jeff, to give him the news. They asked him to come over. And he said he wasn't necessarily shocked to find out that Denise could possibly be dead, but the really shocking part was the freezer. The autopsy was performed by Dr. Ann Buchholz, who had performed over 1,000 autopsies in her career. She had been present when the freezer arrived to the medical examiner's office, and she felt that identifying who the body was inside the freezer was an extremely important duty. She said the body was frozen solid and it was stuck to the bottom of the freezer. She described the position of the body as being curled in a fetal position with the knees drawn up to the chest and the arms secured behind the back with handcuffs. She noted that the body was completely nude and that the head appeared to have been forced down, so it stretched almost to a position of being between the knees, like further than it should be. She also noted that the head was covered with white plastic bags and that the neck muscles seemed to be injured due to being forced between the knees. Her and her team had to use hair dryers aimed at the plastic to remove it from the body, little by little.
To melt the plastic off the body?
Not melt it, but warm it up so they could get it off the body because it was stuck there. Once she removed the plastic, she positively identified the body as a woman. And she had to cut the handcuffs off with bolt cutters because they were so tight around the wrists, she couldn't even get her finger between the hand and the handcuffs. Because it was a woman's body, she had to take samples from every orifice to see if she had been sexually assaulted. So she was able to do that. She then used the hair dryers again to remove the plastic bags from the head. And when she uncovered the face, she noticed there was duct tape over the mouth and the eyes. She removed the tape from the mouth, and she said that the mouth was in the shape of an O, and it had been stuffed with rags. Jewelry was still left on the body, and she described the jewelry that Denise was wearing the night she left to go to the concert. Dr. Buchholz noted that the head had been savagely beaten. There was a large wound over the scalp above the left eye that extended to the left hairline, which exposed a fractured skull. There was a second deep wound on the forehead and a third on the left side of the scalp. There were many, many injuries on the scalp, and some of them showed more skull fractures as well as gray matter from the brain. She determined there had to have been 31 both direct and indirect blows.
Whoa.
On the head.
31.
31.
So
just on the head.
That took at least a half a minute of beating someone on the head. That would be if you could do it nonstop.
And she said the wounds that were left, some of them were round and some of them were like a slash. So she noted that there had to have been either two different tools or a tool with two different ends.
Like a claw hammer and a nail bar?
Yes, something like that.
That's overkill.
It is very much overkill. Fingerprints were taken immediately upon the hands being thawed, and they were able to positively identify Denise by comparing the fingerprints taken to the one that was on her driver's license. But in order for Dr. Buchholz to do a complete examination of Denise's head, she would need to remove the skull and then piece the pieces of it back together.
Just when I thought her job couldn't get any worse.
Thank you. So, Detective Geisler had the horrible duty to contact Denise's parents to ask for permission to do this. She talked to Dennis and he...
Oh.
I know, right? Dennis asked only 2 questions. The first was, is this the best thing to do? And the second was, is she viewable? Detective Geisler said, yes, she believed this was the best thing to do and that reconstruction of Denise's skull would be necessary to get evidence which could help convict her killer. And unfortunately, no. Denise was in no condition to be viewed. So her parents never saw her again. Dr. Buchholz required the assistance of 2 forensic anthropologists to help her reconstruct Denise's skull. She amended her earlier determination that there had to be 31 direct and indirect blows because she said there had to be several more. They found fractures upon fractures. More. And she also found tiny pieces of plastic embedded in the skull in several areas and thought that the skull had been covered in plastic bags before the killer delivered all of these blows.
All of them? So she doesn't think that she was maybe hit a couple times in the bag?
Correct. No. They were all done when her head was covered in the plastic bags. The ultimate cause of death was listed as blunt force trauma to Denise's head.
She didn't suffocate from the bags over her head?
No. And the tools found in John's house, the claw hammer and the nail puller, were compared to the injuries sustained by Denise, and Dr. Buchholz determined they were a match. Remember Elaine and Jack, who had made the call regarding the Ryder truck?
Oh, how could I forget Elaine?
I know. Nosy Elaine. Thank God for nosy people sometimes.
I'm just going to get that VIN number real quick, if you don't mind.
There was a reward of $10,000 that was offered by the Hubers for information leading to an arrest. However, Jack and Elaine wouldn't accept it. Jack said he felt like accepting the money would be like taking blood money, and that he knew the Hubers would have to borrow it in order to pay for it. And I don't know how he knew that, but he did not want to put any more financial burden on
good
Denise's.
People.
I know.
That is so great.
I know. I thought that was so nice. And then he said, if there had been a group or a police agency that was offering this money,
they'd take it.
He would have taken it, but he said he would have split it with the Hubers.
Oh, that's nice. Those are nice people.
Nice people. John Familaro was eventually charged with kidnapping, sexual assault, and first-degree murder of Denise Huber. And he was convicted and sentenced to death. So he sits on death row right now. And the trial took place in California because for a while they weren't sure whether they should have it in Arizona or California. I'm going to tell you a little bit about John Familaro. He was born in New York on Long Island in 1957. He was the youngest of 3 kids. He had an older brother and an older sister. Their names were George and Francine. His mother was kind of kooky. All 3 of the children went to Catholic school, and they were really religious in their family. His mother wasn't really affectionate to him. She played favorites, and George was her favorite. He was really outgoing in a lot of school activities, and he was athletic and things like that, where John wasn't. So John spent a lot of time with his maternal grandma. She lived close, and so he would sometimes spend the whole weekend at her house. His grandfather was in a nursing home, so it was just him and his grandma on the weekends. The kids described their dad as a wonderful man, but they said that their mother was the dominant one in the relationship, and she would verbally abuse the dad. And he just kind of took it as a way to keep the peace. George and Francine did ask him once, why did he put up with the way that the mother acted? And he said he was just really religious. He didn't believe in divorce, and so he just kind of let her do her thing, even though she was extremely domineering, and he just kind of shut up and sat in the background. George and Francine said their mother was really controlling, as I mentioned, but she did it not only in the household, but also outside of the house. They recall a time when their mom tried to regulate the curriculum at their Catholic school by showing up at school and having these little talks with the nuns and the priests. She was really big on morals and discipline and would try to tell the priests and nuns how to do their job. She had lots of rules that she used to control her children. So she would tell them, don't talk about family business to other people, don't talk about politics, don't talk about religion, don't go out. So they really had no social life. They weren't allowed to have sleepovers at their house. And another weird thing that their mom did was when they went on car rides, their dad would drive. And instead of their mom sitting in the front seat, she would have one of the kids sit in the front seat and she would sit in the back seat between the two other children so that there was no whispering or anything going on between the kids, because she said that she felt whispering was evil and she forbade it.
How embarrassing to have your mom sitting between you and your siblings.
I know. And the dad's just like, do, drive along.
He married the nut job.
Honestly. Her means of disciplining the kids weren't just spanking, but she also used psychological abuse against them. George and Francine say that she could be very cold, and when she was mad at them, she would cut them off like they didn't exist, and she would just ignore them for days, and she wouldn't even look or talk to them at all.
I can't get away with that at my house.
I don't know. Isn't it crazy?
My kids would never allow that.
They'd be all up in your face. As a child, John was hyperactive. Francine says, in retrospect, she thought that maybe John demonstrated a lot of behavior that could be considered attention deficit hyperactivity syndrome or obsessive compulsive disorder. So he got into trouble a lot at school, and his grades were not very good.
I studied that in college.
Did you?
I had to videotape boys with ADHD, and I can attest that some of them were almost impossible to manage.
I think John was a lot like that. And Francine kind of took John under her wing because the mom had favorites. George was her favorite, so Francine spent a lot of time showering attention on John. Francine said the other kids would make fun of John a lot, and they picked on him, and that he didn't have a lot of friends. As I mentioned, John's mom liked to control the kids. She did it through fear and intimidation, and her favorite way to do it was to use religion against them. So even the smallest thing they did wrong would turn into this sermon that she would give about how they were going to go to hell. As they grew older, it became harder for the mom to control them. In the book that I read for this story, and it was called Cold Storage by Don Lasseter, he's got chapters and chapters about this family. One really interesting story that he told was about George, the oldest brother. George had fallen in love with a girl named Velma, and she was in California visiting him. After they went out to dinner, George dropped Velma back off at her hotel room and went home. And a little while later, his mother was knocking on her door.
At the hotel?
At the hotel. She didn't know who it was at first, but the person was knocking saying she needed help. And when she opened the door and saw that it was George's mom, she was shocked. And George's mom started physically attacking her.
Why?
She hated her. She did not want her son dating this woman for no good reason that I could find. But she starts attacking her, hitting her. At one point, she's on top of her, choking her, and said she was going to kill her. Finally, Velma gets away, and she calls the police.
Did they arrest the crazy mom?
They did arrest her, but George ended up convincing Velma not to press charges. And just to say, that relationship did not last after that. Big surprise.
You don't say.
When John was in his early 20s, he met a girl named Helen, and they fell madly in love. She was his first love, and she soon became pregnant. John wanted to marry her, but she did not want to settle down, and she decided to have an abortion. The strain of this really affected their relationship, and they grew apart, and this really broke John's heart. He pursued her relentlessly for the next 4 years.
4 years?
Yes. He was obsessed with Helen. She was always on his mind. And he had no close friends to discuss this with, so the person that he went to was a priest at one of the Catholic churches he attended. The priest sort of became a counselor to him, and he would counsel John frequently about Helen. Eventually, John and Helen did reconcile, but it didn't last. She actually got pregnant again, and John asked her to marry him again. She thought about it, and she decided she didn't want to spend the rest of her life with him and instead place the child for adoption.
I wonder, Tanya, if Helen looked like Denise.
I wonder.
Because that would make sense. That would be the catalyst to why he did what he did.
That's true. That's very true, because Helen absolutely broke his heart, especially when she moved out of his life forever and he never saw her again. His relationship with Helen happened during the early 80s, and his next girlfriend, her name was Darlene. She was a little bit older than him, and they started dating around 1987. John was about 30, and she was about 40. John would wine and dine Darlene, showering her with expensive gifts, taking her to gourmet dinners. Like, there was no expense that he spared.
Was he a chiropractor by now?
No, he never finished chiropractic school. Darlene said John was also a smooth talker, and she really did enjoy spending time with him, and they even talked about getting married. However, on a trip to New York City for her birthday that John had surprised her with, and also on this trip he surprised her with tickets to Les Miserables and other Broadway shows, there was one morning in the hotel where she said her and John were kind of roughhousing, playing around with each other, wrestling, and before she knew it, he had handcuffed her, one of her arms, near the window, and I'm not sure what he attached it to, but she was near a window and she was handcuffed, and she wasn't expecting it. And while she was handcuffed, he took off all of her clothing and left her there for hours.
What? What the hell?
I know, right? She said she was extremely traumatized by this. And she said when he came back to the room, because he left her alone, when he came back, he took the handcuff off of her and she sort of just played along, because she said that she just wanted to get back home to California safely.
Did she call the authorities for false imprisonment?
She did not. She just wanted to get out of this trip and get home. She said shortly after they returned to California, she broke up with him. And he didn't understand why. The next girlfriend I'm going to tell you about, her name is Kate, and she was described as really beautiful. And I think Darlene was very pretty too. Nobody really understand how John could get these women because he's really not handsome. Kate, I believe, looked a lot like Denise. She had long brown hair and she was really pretty. She said she really enjoyed spending time with John and he was very charming. But the straw that broke the camel's back in that relationship was there was one day she was over his house and he had some of his painting crew in the living room, and she and John were upstairs in the bedroom. She said they had been kissing a little, and at some point, John had pushed her down on the bed, and when he pushed her down, she had hit her head, like on the headboard, and she was kind of dazed. It wasn't on purpose. She thought that John would give her some care due to her hitting her head, but instead, he got on top of her and put a handcuff on her, like he did to Darlene, and then he removed all of her clothes. She said he got on top of her, and she was really fighting hard against him. He was trying to open up her legs by putting a knee between hers. And finally, at one point, she said she just kind of gave up and said, go ahead, do whatever you're going to do, because as soon as I leave, I'm going to report you to the police. By her saying that, it kind of snapped John out of it, and he let her go. And she said that when the attack was going on, his face had kind of changed when he was attacking her, and it really frightened her. So when she said that she was going to go to the police, his whole demeanor changed and the look on his face changed. But she said she was really afraid of that person that she had seen John turn into. So she stopped seeing him after that. She did reconcile shortly after.
What?
For a little time. I know. Because she said he's really charming. He had a way with words.
I made a mistake.
Yeah, he made a mistake, but that
bullshit.
I know. And that reconciliation did not last long. And this was sometime in the early 90s. So I'm going to tell you what really happened the night of Denise's disappearance. And this is according to the police, because John has never admitted guilt or made any type of confession. In the early morning hours of June 3rd, Denise was driving home from Rob's house after they had attended the concert. On the freeway on her way home, Denise's car blew a tire. She pulled over to the shoulder and put on her hazard lights. She got out of her car, and at some point she encounters John, who may or may not have been wearing a light-colored Los Angeles County deputy sheriff shirt that they found in his closet. They're not sure if he wore it or not. And one of the reasons why police thought maybe he didn't wear it is he had a beard and his hair was a little longer, and that would have been against police regulations. But how do normal people know that?
I wouldn't know that.
I wouldn't know that either. If I was a 23-year-old girl and I saw a guy with a police shirt on or police uniform, I would think he was a cop. So they're thinking he's wearing this police shirt and that's how he gains her trust. He then kidnaps her and takes her to a warehouse that he had at the time, which was in Laguna Hills. He then rapes and beats her to death. He possibly stores her body in a large refrigerator that he had there until he can purchase the deep freezer, which he purchased on June 10th, which was a week after her disappearance.
So is that why they think her body was in a smaller position, because she was frozen originally in a smaller container and then moved?
Yes, they think she had to be squished to be put in the refrigerator, yes.
Why were her stockings off?
I'm thinking she must have taken them off after leaving Rob's house because they were uncomfortable, maybe.
Okay, yeah, that's what I would think too.
John kept the freezer in that warehouse for 11 months, and then he moved it to a storage facility he had rented in San Clemente, California. I
am just pointing out that if you're storing freezers and you're moving freezers like that, there's something weird. He's a single guy, and he's moving freezers around.
And why would you need a freezer in a storage place?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Who's helping him move these freezers? Because He's got it in a Ryder truck, he's got it in a storage place.
Right. And what do you keep in a freezer that it's okay that you're going to have to drive to go get it out? I mean, in my freezer is food. I wouldn't want to drive 5 miles away to go pick it out of a stupid storage facility.
I'm just saying, if I was working the storage facility, I would be like, what the fuck is this about?
In February 1994, that's when he put the freezer in the Ryder truck and he moved to Arizona. So it had been there almost 6 months before Elaine and Jack saw it.
So they think that she was just at the wrong place at the wrong time?
Yes.
That's just really bad luck.
Very bad luck. Because they never did determine whether the tire had been tampered with. They thought, well, maybe, he had put out something in order for someone to run it over and then have her tire be shredded. But there was nothing in the book that I read.
Well, in one of the members only episodes, the culprit actually made tire poppers, remember?
Oh, yes, I do remember that. Yeah, so it's not crazy to think of.
Unfortunately, 5 of the 6 people were men. So it didn't work so well for him.
Right,
yeah. But
no, they think that this just happened. It was a random thing that happened. Like it was a crime of opportunity.
Damn. Well, thanks for that story.
Well, you're welcome, Talia.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate you, and I appreciate all of our listeners, and I hope they will take 1 second, just right now, just 1 second, to subscribe or follow.
We should also give a thanks and a shout out to our new members.
That's right.
The new members are Amber M.
Thank you, Amber M.
Jasmine H.
Thank you, Jasmine H.
Deidre J.
Thank you, Deidre J.
Kimber O.
Thank you, Kimber O.
Lisa S.
Thank you, Lisa S.
And Kathy B.
Thank you, Kathy B.
Thank you, ladies, for becoming our newest members. And thank you to all of our members.
Absolutely. And if you guys want to become a member, you can go to our website, tntcrimes.com, or you can go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/tntcrimes. It helps support us and helps keep us going. There we have a whole bunch of full episodes available. You can also purchase them online. You can go to our Instagram, which is at TNT Crimes, or Twitter or Facebook at TNT Crimes to get more information on all of our episodes. And I want to thank you all again. Did I forget anything?
I don't think so, no. That was awesome.
I'm getting good.
I think after 30 episodes, we have it down pat.
Well, until next time, America, I hope you guys take care of yourself and be safe.
And until next week.
Bye.
Bye.